My name is Sloan. I am 32 years old, and I build acoustic realities for a living. As an audio engineer, I am used to controlling sound, mapping spaces, and predicting exactly how echoes bounce off walls in massive concert venues. I know how to silence a room, and I know how to make it roar. But nothing could have prepared me for the deafening, arrogant silence that dropped over my father's living room when I returned from a grueling 5-day business trip to Seattle. I expected the worst thing waiting for me to be an overflowing email inbox, a miserable case of jet lag, and the lingering exhaustion of a corporate pitch that had drained every ounce of my energy. Instead, I walked through the heavy oak front door of my childhood home to find my family celebrating my financial execution. My father, Callum, and my stepmother, Vera, were lounging on the expensive cream-colored sofa, toasting each other with crystal glasses full of cheap champagne. Sitting on the vintage Persian rug between them was my younger half-sister, Tegan. She was 26 years old, wearing a smug grin and surrounded by a literal mountain of pristine, orange designer boxes and glossy shopping bags from boutiques I knew she could never afford. The smell of fresh leather and citrus perfume hung heavy in the air, masking the underlying rot of what had actually happened in this house while I was away. I dropped my heavy travel suitcase onto the hardwood floor. The loud, sharp thud echoed through the high-ceilinged room and drew their attention immediately. My father did not jump. He did not look guilty, ashamed, or even mildly surprised to see me standing there early. Instead, he looked triumphant. He stood up slowly, smoothing the front of his tailored shirt, and lifted his champagne glass in the air. He sneered at me with a look of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Thanks to your tech shares, our daughter is set for life," he announced, his voice booming with the false authority he always used when he thought he was the smartest man in the room. Tegan did not even have the decency to look away or pretend to be embarrassed. She ran her perfectly manicured hand over the smooth leather of a handbag that probably cost more than my first car. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a high, grating sound that I had hated since childhood, a sound that always signaled she had gotten away with taking something of mine. "It was always supposed to be mine anyway, Sloan," she said, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You just kept it warm for me while I figured out my brand." I felt my heart slam against my ribs, but my feet moved steadily. I walked slowly into the kitchen, my eyes scanning the room, absorbing the nightmare. Sitting right there on the granite kitchen island, weighted down by a decorative crystal vase as if it were a casual piece of mail, was a printed wire transfer receipt. I stepped closer. The bold black ink screamed the number at me. $400,000. My life's work. The equity I had bled for, starved for, and sacrificed my entire youth for, liquidated to fund a 26-year-old's luxury lifestyle. For a fraction of a second, the room tilted. I felt a cold, hard knot form deep in my stomach. The anger was so sharp and acidic it tasted like copper in my mouth. It was a visceral, violent wave of betrayal that threatened to knock the breath right out of my lungs. They expected me to scream. I knew the playbook. They wanted me to throw a massive tantrum, to cry, to hurl insults so they could sit back, roll their eyes, and call me hysterical and crazy, just like they always did whenever I tried to set a boundary. They wanted me to be the villain in the narrative they had just rewritten. But I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the receipt, traced the absurdly large number with my eyes, then looked back up at my father's arrogant posture. And I chuckled. It was a dark, hollow, terrifying sound that echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of a woman who had just realized she held the power to destroy the people trying to ruin her. Tegan's smug smile vanished in an instant. Her fingers gripped the handle of her new bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She snapped, her voice losing all its playful arrogance. "What is so funny?" I smiled back, feeling the invisible shift of power in the room before they even realized they had lost it. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. "Want to hear a secret?" Their faces turned pale before I said another word. The color drained from Callum's cheeks, and Vera lowered her glass, her eyes darting nervously between my father and me. They thought they had backed a helpless animal into a corner, but they had actually just walked straight into a cage with a predator. Before I reveal what they actually sold, and exactly how I ruined their lives with their own greed, tell me what time it is where you are and what city you are watching from. I want to know how far this family betrayal travels, because the sheer stupidity of what my father did is about to become a legendary lesson in federal fraud. To understand how we reached this point of spectacular ruin, you have to understand the toxic dynamic of my family. I was always the invisible child, the workhorse expected to pull the cart while everyone else rode in it. Growing up, my father made it abundantly clear that my interests were a waste of time and an embarrassment to his image. Callum was a man who worshipped appearances, corporate titles, and expensive country club memberships. He wanted a daughter who would marry into money or work in a pristine glass corner office. Instead, he got me. A stubborn girl who spent her weekends soldering wires, fixing blown speakers in the garage, and reading dense manuals on acoustic spatial mapping until 2 in the morning. He called my passion a dirty, masculine hobby. Whenever I tried to show him a new soundboard I had built from scratch, he would sigh heavily, pinch the bridge of his nose, and tell me that practical women chose stable careers, not messy jobs that left them with grease and calluses on their hands. But when Tegan was born to my stepmother, Vera, the rules of the house shifted entirely. Tegan was the golden child. She was effortless, loud, demanding, and treated every fleeting interest she had as a national emergency that our household needed to finance immediately. I remember the exact moment the divide became a permanent, unbridgeable chasm. I was 19 years old, working 2 exhausting part-time jobs to fund my own technical education. I had saved up everything I could, but I was short. I humbled myself and begged my father to co-sign a small personal loan for $3,000 so I could buy a specialized computer rig needed for my advanced audio engineering courses. He looked at me across the dining room table, his face a mask of disappointment, and told me that adulthood meant solving my own problems. He said he was not going to throw good money down the drain for a pipe dream that would never pay the bills. 2 months later, he cheerfully paid $25,000 for Tegan's cosmetic procedures and hired a so-called marketing team because she suddenly decided she wanted to be a lifestyle influencer. Vera defended the massive expense, claiming it was a crucial investment in Tegan's personal brand and future career. From that day on, I knew I was entirely on my own. I stopped asking for help. I stopped seeking their approval, and I locked my heart away from them. I put my head down and worked until my fingers bled. For the next decade, I built my life brick by painful brick. I met my business partner, Jasper, during a disastrous tech convention where the main auditorium audio system failed catastrophically. We fixed it together in under 20 minutes while the event organizers panicked. Jasper was a brilliant, cold, and intensely calculating sound engineer who understood the ruthless business side of tech better than anyone I knew. Together, we founded Echo Forge. It was a startup specializing in cutting-edge acoustic spatial mapping software for massive concert venues, stadiums, and theaters. We started in a hot, dusty, windowless garage that smelled constantly of burning metal, cheap takeout, and stale coffee. We worked 14-hour days. We skipped meals. We poured every single penny we had into our LLC registration, patents, and prototype development. Nobody in my family cared. To Callum and Vera, I was still just playing with wires in a dirty room. They never asked how my business was doing. They only called when they needed someone to fix their home network or when Tegan needed a free ride to the airport because she blew her allowance on clothes. My success was a slow, grueling climb. But eventually, the industry noticed us. We started landing regional contracts, then national ones. The money started flowing in, but Jasper and I kept our lifestyles incredibly modest. We drove old cars and lived in small apartments. We reinvested everything into Echo Forge. We were not just building a company, we were building an empire, and we protected our equity with our lives. The trouble started when a prominent tech magazine featured Echo Forge as one of the top 10 startups to watch in the audio space. There was a massive full-page spread with my face on it, detailing our projected valuations and industry disruption. I made the terrible mistake of leaving a copy of that magazine on the kitchen counter during a rare Thanksgiving visit to my father's house. I saw Tegan staring at the page. Her eyes traced the numbers, the projected millions, and the glowing quotes about my leadership. I watched her jaw tighten. For a girl who had spent years trying to go viral on social media with nothing but filtered selfies and paid followers, seeing her invisible older sister being praised as a tech innovator was a bitter, jagged pill to swallow. She did not congratulate me. She just tossed the magazine into the recycling bin, rolled her eyes, and muttered that tech journalists would write about anyone these days if they paid enough. But Callum noticed it too. He read the article in his study, and for the first time in his entire life, he looked at me not with pride, but with calculating, hungry greed. He started dropping subtle hints. He would ask about my profit margins during casual phone calls. He asked if Jasper was a trustworthy partner and if I owned the majority voting rights. He even suggested that since we were family, I should consider letting Tegan manage my public relations for a generous, six-figure salary. I shut that down immediately. I told him Echo Forge handled its own marketing and Tegan had zero qualifications. He was deeply offended. He gave me a long, cold stare and said, "You know, Sloan, no one succeeds alone. A good daughter remembers the family that raised her when she strikes gold." I almost laughed in his face. The family that raised me? The family that refused to loan me $3,000 for school? Now that my sweat and tears were turning into real equity, suddenly they wanted a seat at the table. I refused to let them in. I drew a hard boundary, thinking that would be the end of it. I assumed they would just go back to ignoring me. But a narcissist does not handle rejection well. If you do not give them what they feel entitled to, they will simply find a way to take it. The chain of events that led to my financial crucifixion started with a burst pipe. 2 months ago, the ancient plumbing in my apartment building gave out in the middle of the night, flooding my entire living room and bedroom with 3 inches of dirty water. It was an absolute disaster. I had to rip out the ruined hardwood flooring, replace the bottom half of the drywall, and live out of a cramped hotel room while the contractors tore my place apart. During the chaos of moving my belongings into temporary storage, I had to figure out what to do with my heavy, reinforced steel fireproof safe. It was bulky, weighed a ton, and my temporary hotel room simply did not have the space or the structural support for it. Inside that safe were my most critical, irreplaceable physical documents. My apartment lease, personal insurance policies, my birth certificate, and most importantly, the original paper share certificates from the very first year Echo Forge was incorporated. I needed a dry, highly secure place to store it for a few weeks. Like an idiot craving a normal family dynamic, I called my father. Callum lived in a large suburban house with a finished, climate-controlled basement. When I asked if I could tuck the safe in the corner of his basement until my apartment was fixed, he was surprisingly accommodating. He played the part of the helpful, protective father perfectly. He even helped me carry it down the stairs, grunting and joking about how heavy my corporate secrets must be. At the time, Tegan was spiraling out of control. Her influencer career was stagnating, sponsorships were drying up, and her credit card debt was climbing faster than her follower count. During one of my brief visits to check on the safe, she cornered me in the narrow upstairs hallway. She looked frantic, her eyes wide and demanding. She aggressively demanded that I share my company profits with her. She said she needed an immediate loan of $50,000 to fund a lifestyle rebrand and hire a new management agency. "I am your sister," she whined, her voice dripping with toxic entitlement. "You are sitting on a gold mine. It is selfish to hoard it all when I am struggling to survive." I looked her dead in the eye and said no. I told her my company was not a personal piggy bank for her shopping addictions and failed ventures. Tegan threw a massive, screaming fit. She stomped her feet, screaming that I was a greedy, jealous loser who wanted to see her fail. Callum rushed out of his home office to intervene. Did he scold Tegan for demanding my money? Of course not. He looked at me with deep, exaggerated disappointment. "She is family, Sloan," he sighed heavily, crossing his arms and blocking my path. "The wealth you have is built on the foundation of this family. You owe it to us to share your blessings." I did not argue. You cannot logic someone out of a position they did not logic themselves into. I just pushed past him, left the house, and vowed to move my safe back to my apartment the second the floors were dry. A week later, the biggest opportunity of my entire career landed on my desk. A massive theater chain in Seattle wanted to contract Echo Forge to map their entire nationwide network of venues. It was a monumental deal that would secure our company's future for the next decade. I had to fly out to Seattle for 5 days of intense, high-stakes negotiations with their procurement teams. Before I left, I called Callum to remind him not to let anyone near the basement while I was gone. He sounded so warm, so incredibly fatherly on the phone. "Do not worry about a thing, sweetheart," he promised smoothly. "Focus on your big meeting. Your safe is perfectly secure with me. I will not let anyone near it." I believed him. I boarded that flight to Seattle thinking my biggest challenge would be battling corporate procurement lawyers over liability clauses. I had no idea the real thieves were already sleeping under my father's roof. While I was sitting in sterile, freezing conference rooms in Seattle, drinking terrible hotel coffee and negotiating complex pricing models, my father was executing a heist right in his own basement. I did not know the specific details of what happened until much later, when the legal dust settled and the digital footprints were exposed by my legal team. But this is the exact timeline of their betrayal. The catalyst arrived in the mail. A private equity investor named Gideon had been aggressively following Echo Forge's rise in the tech journals. Gideon was one of those flashy, reckless wealthy men who bought up secondary shares in startups, hoping for a massive payout when the companies eventually went public. He had tried to contact Jasper and me via email dozens of times, but Jasper had routed his aggressive, lowball offers straight to our spam folder. Frustrated by our total radio silence, Gideon decided to go old school. He mailed a formal, physical letter of intent to purchase equity. But Gideon used an outdated business directory from our very first year of operation. He sent the letter to the original registered address of Echo Forge, my father's house. The heavy, premium envelope was clearly addressed to me. But Callum did not care about federal mail tampering laws. He took it into his study, locked the door, and opened it. He stood there, reading a letter offering $400,000 for a block of early founder shares. I can only imagine what went through his mind. For a man secretly drowning in his own ballooning mortgage debt and dealing with a wife who spent money faster than he could earn it, that number must have looked like divine salvation. It must have looked like the ultimate power he always craved but never earned. He showed the letter to Tegan. Instead of telling him to forward it to me immediately, she saw a golden ticket to Paris and a lifetime supply of designer bags. Together, they formulated a plan that was as breathtakingly reckless as it was malicious. They hired a shady, off-the-books locksmith from 2 towns over to drill the heavy lock on my steel safe. It took the guy 2 hours to crack it open. Inside, they bypassed my personal documents and found exactly what they were looking for. The thick, embossed paper share certificates from our first year of incorporation. They looked incredibly official. They looked expensive. Callum contacted Gideon using a fake email address he quickly set up in my name. He claimed that I was out of town on urgent business, but that I had authorized him to act as my legal proxy to handle the private sale of my shares because we were keeping the transaction quiet. Gideon, blinded by the prospect of acquiring Echo Forge equity at a slight discount, ignored every single standard protocol of due diligence. He did not insist on speaking to me directly on a video call. He did not hire an independent corporate lawyer to verify the current structure of the company. Callum and Tegan downloaded a generic, basic power of attorney form from a free legal website. They filled it out, naming Callum as my sole financial proxy for all corporate assets. Then, my father forged my signature. He did not even practice or hire a professional. He just clumsily traced it from an old birthday card I had given him years ago. They scanned the forged documents, the stolen paper certificates, and my father's state identification, sending it all to Gideon in a zipped file. Gideon, eager to close the deal before I supposedly changed my mind, approved the paperwork in less than 24 hours. He wired $400,000 directly into a joint checking account controlled by my father and Vera. Just like that, they sold my company out from under me. They thought they had pulled off the perfect, victimless crime. They assumed that because we shared a last name, I would simply absorb the crushing loss to keep the peace. They thought I would be too embarrassed, too beaten down by years of family loyalty to call the police on my own flesh and blood. They thought my success belonged to them. It was day 3 of the Seattle negotiations. The air in the boardroom was tense, thick with the smell of dry erase markers and stale pastries. We were arguing aggressively over indemnification clauses when my phone, sitting face down on the polished mahogany table, vibrated twice. It was a distinct, rapid pattern. An emergency server alert. I kept my face perfectly neutral, politely excusing myself to grab a glass of water from the credenza. In the hallway, I flipped my phone over. The screen showed an automated, red-flagged security warning from our cloud management system. Someone had attempted to access the highly restricted Echo Forge Master Digital Vault. The login failed due to an incorrect biometric prompt, but the system automatically logged the attempting IP address. It was an IP address originating from a residential neighborhood in my hometown. Specifically, my father's internet service provider. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. A second later, my phone rang. It was Jasper. He never called during pitch meetings unless the building was literally on fire. I answered, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Tell me you are looking at the server logs," Jasper said, his voice clipped, fast, and devoid of emotion. "I see the failed login," I replied, pacing the carpeted hallway rapidly. Someone tried to open the shareholder register file. "It gets worse," Jasper continued, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. "I just got an automated ping from the state corporate registry. A private investor named Gideon submitted a preliminary inquiry to register a transfer of ownership for a block of founder shares. Your shares, Sloan." I stopped pacing. The hallway spun for a fraction of a second, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The scattered pieces fell together with sickening, devastating clarity. The safe in the basement. My father's sudden, suspicious willingness to help. Tegan's desperate need for cash. "They broke into my safe," I whispered, the crushing reality of the betrayal settling heavy in my chest. "They took the paper certificates." I expected Jasper to yell. I expected him to panic and tell me the company was doomed. Instead, his voice became terrifyingly calm, the voice of a general preparing for war. "Did you authorize a proxy? Did you sign anything, Sloan?" "Think carefully." "Nothing," I said firmly, my vision sharpening. "I have not signed a physical document outside of our legal office in months." "Then it is fraud," Jasper stated simply. "Wire fraud, forgery, and corporate theft. Do not call them, Sloan. Do not text your dad. Do not scream at your sister. If you alert them now, they will panic and start moving the money offshore or destroying the paper trail. We need them comfortable. We need them feeling invincible." Every single instinct in my body screamed at me to dial my father's number and burn his life to the ground right then and there. I wanted to hear his voice break. I wanted to demand answers. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. It was not just about the money. It was the horrific fact that my own father looked at my years of suffering, my endless nights of grueling work, and decided he had the right to steal it just to keep his golden child happy. But Jasper was right. Anger produces denial. Anger gives them a chance to invent excuses and call lawyers. Evidence produces prison sentences. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steadying into a cold, hard monotone. "You go back into that boardroom and close our deal," Jasper instructed. "Act like absolutely nothing is wrong. I am calling Maeve and Beckett right now. We are going to build a digital and legal fence around them. By the time you get home, they will have already hung themselves." I hung up the phone. I took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothing down the lapels of my blazer. I shoved the immense heartbreak down into a dark, cold, reinforced box inside my mind and locked it tight. I walked back into the boardroom, smiled brightly at the theater executives, and spent the next 6 hours ruthlessly negotiating the best, most lucrative contract Echo Forge had ever seen. I used the blinding rage as fuel. While my family was busy stealing my past, I was busy securing my future. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. I had to maintain the flawless illusion of ignorance while watching my family flaunt the spoils of their treason from 2,000 miles away. That evening, as I sat alone in my hotel room eating a cold sandwich, I received a text message from Callum. "Just checking in, kiddo. Hope the big meeting is going well. The house is quiet. Everything is perfectly safe here. Love you." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling physically nauseous. The sheer audacity to use the word safe while standing over my broken lockbox, having just sold my life's work to a stranger. I forced my trembling fingers to type back a cheerful, oblivious response. "Going great, Dad. Thanks for keeping an eye on things. See you soon." Meanwhile, Tegan had absolutely no concept of discretion. She lacked the basic intelligence required to be a successful criminal. She immediately took to Instagram. Her stories were a chaotic, glittering blur of luxury boutiques, expensive dinners, and clinking champagne flutes. She posted a photo of a brand new, diamond-encrusted watch with the caption, "When the universe finally gives you what you deserve." #blessed. #self-made. #Paris here I come. She was literally wearing federal evidence on her wrist for the world to see. While Tegan was busy shopping away my equity, my allies were going to war. Back home, my fiancé, Beckett, drove straight to my apartment building. He spoke to my neighbors, leveraging his calm demeanor, and managed to secure security footage from a doorbell camera directly across the street from my father's house. The timestamp clearly showed a commercial locksmith van parked in Callum's driveway for 2 hours on the exact day the fraudulent transaction with Gideon was initiated. Simultaneously, Maeve, our ruthless, brilliant corporate attorney, was pulling heavy strings at the state level. She contacted the corporate registry and flagged Gideon's transfer request as highly fraudulent, freezing the administrative process entirely without alerting Gideon or my father. She pulled the metadata from the forged power of attorney Gideon had submitted, proving the digital signature was manipulated. When my contract in Seattle was finally signed, sealed, and legally binding, I did not celebrate. I changed my flight immediately and headed to the airport a full day early. I did not tell my father I was coming back. I landed in the late afternoon, the Colorado air crisp and biting. Beckett was waiting for me at the arrival's curb. He did not ask how I was feeling. He just pulled me into a tight, grounding hug, handed me a thick manila folder filled with Maeve's legal discoveries, and opened the car door. "Jasper and Maeve are on standby at the office," Beckett said as he pulled onto the highway, his jaw set in a hard line. "Whenever you are ready to drop the bomb." "I am ready," I replied, staring out the window at the passing mountains, feeling nothing but cold resolve. "Drive to my dad's house." The ride was quiet. I reviewed the documents in the folder one last time. IP logs, doorbell camera stills, corporate bylaws, signed affidavits. It was an ironclad net, woven tightly enough to catch a great white shark, let alone two arrogant guppies like Callum and Tegan. We pulled into my father's driveway. The house looked exactly the same. The manicured green lawn, the pristine white paint job. A perfect suburban lie covering up a rot so deep it threatened to collapse the whole structure. Beckett parked the car down the street, completely out of sight. I told him to wait for my signal. This initial confrontation belonged to me alone. I needed to look them in the eyes when they still thought they had one. I grabbed my suitcase, walked up the driveway, and unlocked the front door with my spare key. I stepped into the smell of cheap champagne and the sight of those orange boxes. And that brings us right back to the beginning. Standing in the kitchen, watching my father sneer at me while Tegan stroked her stolen leather bag. "Want to hear a secret?" I asked, my smile cold and sharp. "What happens when the people who think they own you realize they have just stolen from a ghost?" Before we dive into the fallout, if you are enjoying this story of family karma, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring more of these incredible stories to you. The silence in the living room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I stood there, my travel suitcase resting against my leg, staring down the three people who had spent my entire life making me feel small. Now, they were the ones shrinking. Want to hear a secret? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the room like a gunshot. Callum lowered his champagne glass. The smug, victorious grin that had been plastered across his face just moments ago began to falter, replaced by a twitch of nervous confusion. He puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his artificial authority. "There are no secrets here, Sloane," he said, his tone carrying a warning edge. "You made a massive profit. We secured your future and ours. You should be thanking me for handling the paperwork while you were busy." I took a slow, deliberate step forward. I walked right up to the granite kitchen island and tapped my index finger twice on the printed wire transfer receipt. "The shares you just sold to Gideon do not belong to me," I said smoothly. Vera frowned, crossing her arms defensively. "What are you talking about? Your name was on the envelope. You are the founder." "I am a founder," I corrected her. "But I do not own those shares as an individual." 5 years ago, when Jasper and I took on our first round of seed funding, we restructured the entire company to protect ourselves from personal liability. Every single share of equity I possess is legally held by a parent entity called Echo Forge Holdings LLC. Jasper and I are co-owners of that LLC. I watched the exact moment the realization hit my father. His eyes widened, and the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He was a man who worked in corporate sales. He knew exactly what a holding company was. He knew what corporate bylaws entailed. "You did not just forge my signature to sell my personal property, Dad," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "You forged a signature to authorize the sale of a corporate asset that is jointly owned by someone outside of this family. You sold Jasper's property. You committed corporate theft against a registered entity." Tegan, who had been clutching her new designer bag, suddenly let go of it as if the leather had caught fire. She looked frantically between me and our father. "What does she mean, Dad?" she demanded, her voice shrill and panicking. "What is she talking about? The money is in the account. The bank cleared it." "Money moving does not make a transaction legal, Tegan," I said, turning my gaze to her. "Bank robbers get money into their bags, too. It still makes them felons." Vera stepped forward, her voice trembling, but desperate to hold on to the delusion. "You are bluffing, Sloane. We have the power of attorney. You signed it. You authorized your father to negotiate. The investor accepted it. It is a done deal." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that made Vera flinch. "You mean the power of attorney you downloaded from a free legal template website? The one where you traced my signature from a birthday card I gave you when I was 20? Callum staggered backward slightly, his knees hitting the edge of the expensive sofa. He swallowed hard. "How did you know about that?" I did not answer him directly. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out a fresh, sealed envelope that Maeve had given me at the airport. I tossed it onto the kitchen island next to his ridiculous wire transfer receipt. "Because my corporate attorney knows everything," I whispered. "And she is going to have a very, very long conversation with you about wire fraud, identity theft, and federal mail tampering." Callum's breathing became shallow and rapid. He tried to speak, but his mouth just opened and closed without any sound coming out. The illusion of his power was shattered, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, aging man who had just realized he had walked off a cliff. But I was not done. I had held on to this anger for a decade, and I was going to make sure they felt every single ounce of it. "That is just the first secret," I said, leaning closer to my father, refusing to let him look away. "Do you want to know the second one?" Tegan was shaking now. Her hands hovered over her mountain of orange designer boxes, her eyes darting toward the front door as if she was contemplating making a run for it. "What else?" Callum rasped, his voice cracking. "What else could there possibly be? We gave him the certificates. We gave him the official papers from your safe." I smiled, and it was the most genuine smile I had worn in years. "Those thick, beautiful, embossed paper certificates you stole from my basement safe?" The ones you so carefully scanned and sent to Gideon? Callum nodded slowly, terrified of what I was about to say next. They're worthless, I told him, relishing the look of pure horror that washed over his face. They are obsolete versions from 5 years ago. When we restructured Echo Forge into a holding company, the state required us to void all original paper certificates and issue new digital equity trackers. The serial numbers on the papers you sold have been officially invalidated on the Federal Registry for half a decade. Vera gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. You did not sell equity, Dad, I continued, my voice echoing in the silent room. You sold $400,000 worth of useless, decorative waste paper. And Gideon just found out. To prove my point, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. I had pre-arranged this call with Maeve and Jasper. I dialed Gideon's direct number and put it on speakerphone, setting the device down on the granite counter right next to the wire receipt. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. Sloan? Gideon's voice sparked through the speaker. It was loud, harsh, and practically vibrating with fury. Is that you? Yes, Gideon, I am here, I said calmly. I am standing in the room with the man who sold you the voided shares. Callum flinched as if he had been physically struck. He tried to reach for the phone to hang it up, but I slammed my hand down on the counter, glaring at him so fiercely he froze in his tracks. You listen to me very carefully, Gideon screamed, his voice filling the kitchen, bouncing off the expensive tiles. I just got a notice from the state registry. My transfer request was denied due to fraudulent documentation. My legal team just ran the serial numbers on those certificates. They are dead assets. I know, I said quietly. I did not authorize this sale, Gideon. My safe was broken into. My signature was forged. There was a heavy, terrifying silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of something heavy being thrown against a wall in Gideon's office. Who is there with you? Gideon demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal growl. Put the man who signed that proxy form on the line. Right now. I looked at my father. Speak to your buyer, Dad, I whispered. Callum leaned toward the phone, his hands trembling violently. Hello? He squeaked, sounding like a frightened child rather than the arrogant patriarch he pretended to be. You listen to me, you pathetic thief, Gideon snarled. I do not care what kind of messy family drama you have going on. You committed wire fraud across state lines. You took $400,000 of my money under false pretenses. You have 24 hours to reverse that wire transfer. Callum's eyes darted frantically to Vera, then to Tegan. Sir, please, there has been a massive misunderstanding. I thought I had permission. I can explain everything if you just give me a few days. I do not want an explanation, Gideon roared. I want my money. If every single cent of that $400,000 is not back in my private holding account by the end of the business day tomorrow, I am calling the federal authorities. I will have the FBI at your door. I will sue you for everything you own, and then I will make sure you die in a federal penitentiary. Do you understand me? Callum was hyperventilating now. Yes. Yes, sir. I understand. Gideon hung up the phone. The click echoed in the kitchen, finalizing the doom that had just descended upon my family. Tegan burst into tears. Loud, ugly, gasping sobs. She dropped to her knees on the rug, clutching her head. We are going to jail, she wailed. Dad, we are going to jail. Vera rushed over to her, trying to shush her, but her own hands were shaking too hard to be comforting. Callum leaned against the counter, clutching his chest, staring at the phone as if it were a bomb that had just gone off. It is over, Sloan, he begged, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. Please. You have to call him back. You have to tell him it was a mistake. Tell him you will validate the shares. You have enough money. You can spare this. Please, save your family. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hard resolve. I am not going to save you. In fact, I brought some friends to make sure you do not try to run. Before Callum could ask what I meant, the heavy doorbell rang. Who is at the door? I did not answer my father. I simply turned my back on him, walked down the hallway, and pulled the front door open. Standing on the porch in the biting evening air was Jasper, my business partner, and Maeve, our lead corporate attorney. Jasper wore his usual black hoodie and a dark, unreadable expression. Maeve, on the other hand, looked like a shark dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Right on time," I said, stepping aside to let them in. Jasper walked in first, his eyes immediately sweeping the room, taking in the designer boxes, the cheap champagne, and the terrified faces of my family. He did not say a word to them. He just walked over to the living room and stood next to me, a silent, intimidating wall of support. Maeve walked straight to the kitchen island. She placed her briefcase on the granite counter with a loud, heavy thud. She popped the golden latches, opened it, and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. Callum tried to put on a brave face, straightening his posture and wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Look, I do not know who you people are, but this is a private family matter. Sloane and I are just having a disagreement." Maeve did not even look at him. She just kept laying out the papers. "My name is Maeve," she said, her voice crisp and entirely devoid of emotion. "I am the senior legal counsel for Echo Forge Holdings, LLC. And you, sir, are not dealing with a family matter. You're dealing with a corporate entity that is currently preparing to hand you over to the federal prosecutor's office." Vera stepped forward, trying to use her age as a shield. "Now you listen here, young lady. You cannot just barge into our home and threaten us. We are Sloane's parents." Maeve finally looked up, her gaze pinning Vera to the floor. "And you must be Vera, the woman whose joint checking account just received $400,000 in stolen funds. Tell me, Vera, did you enjoy the shopping spree? Because the federal government considers spending stolen wire funds to be active participation in a criminal conspiracy." Vera's mouth snapped shut. She took 2 steps back, hiding behind Callum. Jasper reached into the folder and pulled out a glossy photograph. He tossed it onto the counter. It was a high-resolution still from a security camera. It clearly showed Callum standing in his driveway, shaking hands with a man wearing a locksmith uniform, while Tegan stood in the background pointing toward the basement windows. "We have the security footage from the neighbors," Jasper said, his voice cold and calculating. "We have the IP address logs showing someone from this house trying to hack into our secure servers. We have the forged signature report from an independent forensic expert. And we have the recorded phone call between you and Gideon." Callum stared at the photograph, his entire body trembling. His breathing was so shallow I thought he might actually pass out. "Jasper, please," Callum begged, his voice breaking. "I know we have not always seen eye to eye, but Sloane is my daughter. She is family. Please, just let us fix this privately. Do not destroy our lives." Jasper looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I am not your family, Callum. I do not care about your holidays or your bloodlines. You broke into a safe and tried to sell half of my life's work to a stranger so your daughter could buy shiny bags. As far as I am concerned, you are just a thief who got caught." Maeve tapped her pen against the granite counter, drawing everyone's attention back to the legal documents. "Let us get down to numbers," she said sharply. "Gideon gave you 24 hours. But Echo Forge is giving you less." She slid a formal demand letter across the counter. "You will wire the entire $400,000 back to Gideon's account immediately," Maeve instructed. "Once that is done, you will sign a full confession of corporate espionage and theft, which we will hold in escrow. If you ever speak to Sloane, Jasper, or any employee of Echo Forge again, if you ever attempt to claim ownership of her success, or if you ever disparage her name in public, we will submit the confession and the evidence to the district attorney." Callum stared at the demand letter as if it were written in a foreign language. He reached out with a shaky hand and touched the paper. "There is just one problem," Callum whispered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes and running down his cheek. "What problem?" I demanded, crossing my arms. Callum looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. "We cannot wire the full amount back to Gideon." "Why not?" Maeve asked, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "Because we do not have it anymore." The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at my father, trying to process the sheer audacity of what he had just confessed. The money had only hit their account 3 days ago. "What do you mean you do not have it?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Tegan started sobbing louder, burying her face in her hands. Vera looked away, staring at the wall as if it held the answers to her impending prison sentence. We spent it, Callum choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Maeve pulled out a fresh notepad and a pen. She looked at Callum like a doctor examining a terminal patient. Explain. Right now. Give me the exact burn rate. Where did the money go? Callum swallowed hard, leaning heavily against the counter. When the wire cleared, we thought we were safe. We thought the deal was done. Tegan had debts. She needed to rebrand. She transferred $85,000 into her personal account. I looked at the mountain of orange boxes in the living room. $85,000 in 3 days. She had bought vintage watches, designer luggage, limited edition handbags, and paid in full for a month-long stay at a luxury wellness resort in Paris. She had burned through a fortune just to impress strangers on the internet. And the rest? Jasper demanded, his patience entirely evaporated. That leaves over $300,000. Where is it? Callum looked at Vera, who refused to meet his gaze. We had our own debts. I was 3 months behind on the house mortgage. They were threatening foreclosure. I used $70,000 to pay off the arrears and secure the deed. Then Vera had credit card debts. Secret debts I did not know about until the money arrived. We paid off $50,000 to various credit companies. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. They had stolen my future to pay for their past mistakes. They had liquidated my equity to plug the sinking holes in a ship they had built out of lies and financial illiteracy. So, Maeve summarized, her pen scratching rapidly across the paper. Between the mortgage, the credit cards, and Tegan's shopping spree, you have burned through $205,000, leaving roughly $195,000 in the account. Yes, Callum whispered. That is not going to satisfy Gideon, Maeve stated coldly. He wants $400,000. He wants his entire principal investment returned by tomorrow evening, or he files federal charges. Tegan scrambled to her feet, running over to me and grabbing my arm. Sloane, please. She begged, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. You have to help us. You have millions in company valuation. You can just write Gideon a check. You can pay him off and make this go away. We are your family. I looked down at her hands gripping my sleeve. I felt a surge of revulsion so strong it made me physically step back, forcing her to let go. You are not my family, I said, my voice eerily calm. You are a parasite. You spent years calling me a loser. You spent years mocking my work. And the second you saw a chance to steal from me, you took it without a single ounce of hesitation. I am not writing a check to cover your theft. I am not bailing you out. Callum fell to his knees. He actually dropped to the floor, grabbing the hem of my blazer. Sloane, I am begging you. If I go to prison, Vera will have nothing. Tegan will have nothing. I will lose my job. I will lose the house. We will be ruined. I looked down at the man who had refused to loan me $3,000 for school. I looked at the man who had told me I was on my own. Adulthood means solving your own problems, Dad, I quoted softly, throwing his own words back in his face. I am not throwing good money down the drain to save a sinking ship. I looked at Maeve. We are done here. Maeve closed her briefcase, the latches snapping shut with a final, echoing crack. You have until 5 o'clock tomorrow evening to figure out how to refund Gideon, she told Callum, who was still weeping on the floor. I suggest you start calling real estate agents and pawn shops. Because at 5:01, the federal authorities will be notified. Jasper and I walked out the front door, leaving them to drown in the nightmare they had created. As we walked down the driveway, I felt a massive, heavy weight lift off my chest. But the fallout was far from over. Because when a toxic family realizes they cannot manipulate you anymore, they turn to their last resort. They unleash the flying monkeys. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. I was sitting in my apartment, drinking a hot cup of coffee and watching the sunrise over the city, feeling a strange sense of peace. I looked at the caller ID. It was Aunt Flora, my father's older sister. She was the matriarch of the extended family, A woman who thrived on gossip and demanded unquestioning loyalty to the bloodline. I knew exactly why she was calling. Callum had panicked and spent the entire night spinning a web of lies, trying to recruit allies to pressure me into saving him. I took a sip of my coffee and answered the call. Sloane Elizabeth, Aunt Flora barked, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. I just spent 2 hours on the phone with your father. He is in tears. He says you are threatening to send him to prison over a simple misunderstanding about some company paperwork. It was not a misunderstanding, Aunt Flora, I said calmly. He forged my signature and stole $400,000. Do not exaggerate to me, young lady, Flora snapped. He is your father. He raised you. He put a roof over your head. If he made a mistake, you sit down and figure it out privately. You do not bring lawyers into the family. You are being a cruel, vindictive, cold-hearted child. You need to call that investor, pay him whatever he wants, and drop this nonsense immediately. Family protects family. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I just smiled into the phone. Aunt Flora, I am going to send you a text message right now. I suggest you open it before you say another word defending him. I hung up the phone. I opened my messages and sent her the audio file Jasper had extracted from the security camera in the driveway. It was the clip of Callum talking to the locksmith, clearly stating he was breaking into his daughter's safe because she owed him for raising her. I also sent the photograph of Tegan pointing at the basement window and the forged document with Callum's fake signature on it. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Flora. I will not be contacting you again. May God forgive him. She blocked Callum's number 5 minutes after that. The flying monkey attack had been neutralized before it even began. Truth is the ultimate defense against manipulation. Meanwhile, the real-world consequences were hitting my father and sister like a runaway freight train. Callum, desperate to find the missing money, had tried to take out an emergency corporate loan through the commercial real estate firm where he worked. The firm ran a routine background check and flagged the pending federal inquiry attached to his name by Gideon's lawyers. By noon, Callum was called into his boss's office. When he could not explain why a private equity investor was accusing him of wire fraud, he was terminated on the spot. He was escorted out of the building by security, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, stripped of the corporate title he had valued more than his own daughter. Tegan's downfall was even swifter and far more public. Gideon's legal team had immediately petitioned a judge to freeze all bank accounts associated with the fraudulent wire transfer. When Tegan tried to pay the massive balance on her credit card for the Paris trip, the transaction was declined. Her management agency, sensing a massive scandal, immediately dropped her. 2 major sponsors canceled her upcoming brand deals. Desperate to avoid federal charges, she was forced to pack up every single orange designer box, every vintage watch, and every luxury handbag, and take them to a high-end consignment shop downtown. She had to sell them all at a massive loss just to scrape together the cash to send back to Gideon. But it was not enough. Even with Tegan selling her stolen luxury goods and Callum liquidating his retirement accounts, they were still short by over $100,000. Gideon's deadline of 5 o'clock arrived. Maeve called Gideon's legal team. She informed them that Echo Forge had zero involvement in the fraud and provided all the evidence proving Callum acted alone. Gideon, realizing he had been played by an amateur, unleashed hell. He filed formal charges for wire fraud. To avoid spending 10 years in a federal penitentiary, Callum and Vera were forced to make the ultimate sacrifice. They had to agree to a massive, crushing restitution plan. And to fund that plan, they had to list their beautiful, pristine suburban house on the market. The ironic justice of it all was almost poetic. Callum had stolen my equity to pay off the mortgage on that house, trying to secure his precious image. Now, because of that very theft, he was forced to sell the house to keep himself out of a jail cell. They lost everything. The house, the jobs, the luxury items, and the fake respect they had demanded from everyone around them. The empire of lies had finally burned to the ground. 3 weeks later, the final chapter of the nightmare concluded in the sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room of Maeve's law firm. I sat at the long mahogany table, with Jasper on my left and Beckett on my right. Across from us sat Callum, Vera, and Tegan. They looked entirely unrecognizable. The arrogant sneers and smug smiles were gone. Callum looked 10 years older, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow and defeated. Vera was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Tegan looked exhausted, wearing a plain gray sweater, the glossy influencer facade completely stripped away. Maeve stood at the head of the table, sliding a thick stack of legal documents toward my father. "These are the final settlement and restitution agreements," Maeve stated smoothly. "You have agreed to sell your primary residence to refund the remaining balance to the defrauded party. In exchange for Echo Forge Holdings declining to pursue additional civil damages for corporate espionage, you will sign this binding non-disclosure and restraining order." Callum picked up the pen with a trembling hand. He looked across the table at me. His eyes were red, brimming with unshed tears. "Sloane," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know I have failed you. I know I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But please, we are losing the house. We are moving into a small rental apartment across town. Tegan is working retail to pay off her debts. We have nothing left." He paused, hoping for a sliver of sympathy. When I gave him none, he continued, "I will sign whatever you want. But please, do not make this restraining order permanent. Let me call you on your birthday. Let me send you a card on the holidays. I am still your father. Do not cut me out of your life forever." For years, that phrase, "I am still your father," had been his ultimate weapon. It was the excuse he used to justify unequal treatment, the shield he hid behind when he broke promises, and the guilt trip he deployed whenever I tried to stand up for myself. I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of closure. "You are my father," I said, my voice steady, clear, and devoid of anger. "But you decided what that title meant. You decided it meant you could take from me whenever you wanted. You decided it meant my success was just a resource for you to harvest." I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. "Family is supposed to be the people who protect you from the thieves of the world. But what do you do when the thieves are the ones sitting at your dinner table?" I asked him. He lowered his head, unable to answer. "Sign the papers, Dad," I said softly. "And then, please, do not ever contact me again." He signed. Vera signed. Tegan signed, her tears staining the thick legal paper. When the meeting ended, Jasper and Beckett stood up. I walked out of the conference room without looking back. I did not feel a sudden burst of overwhelming joy. I felt a quiet, lingering grief for the family I had always wanted but never actually had. I mourned the illusion of them. But I also felt incredibly, profoundly free. Keeping them in my life simply because we shared a last name would have taught them that every boundary was temporary, every consequence could be negotiated, and every piece of my life was available if they just applied enough pressure. 6 months later, Echo Forge successfully completed the massive Seattle theater project. Our valuation skyrocketed, and Jasper and I expanded our team, moving out of our cramped office into a beautiful, state-of-the-art sound studio downtown. That spring, Beckett and I got married. We held the ceremony at a stunning historic theater, utilizing the very acoustic mapping technology my company had designed to make the music sound absolutely flawless. The room was filled with our chosen family. Jasper was my man of honor. Maeve attended, drinking premium champagne and laughing with our engineers. There was no empty table reserved for guilt. There was no dramatic arrival from a weeping sister or a demanding father. There was just peace, love, and the beautiful life I had built with my own 2 hands. I protected my work. I protected my peace. And I never spoke to Callum, Vera, or Tegan ever again. So, that is my story. Many people, especially older relatives who worship the idea of unquestioning family loyalty, have told me that I went too far. They say I was too ruthless in letting my father lose his job and his house, and that I should have found a way to bail him out to keep the family together. What do you guys think? Am I a cold, ruthless daughter who went too far to punish her own flesh and blood? Or did I simply demand the justice and boundaries I rightfully deserved after a lifetime of being used? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I will be reading all of them. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story today. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more insane, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.